We're back. This is part 2 of chapter 5, A Cast Converges. Is that right? No, chapter 5, A Day on the Set, part 2. Whew, it's a long one. Let's see what else I want to tell you about. I'm sure there's other things you've been thinking about and seeing. Oh, these guys, those Russian nesting dolls. Debbie goes into Maggie and the Mike and the Torgo into the Master. They're very cool. I got those on Etsy. They were given to me by the woman who makes them. And she's called Bobo Babushka on Etsy. So I will try to remember to give links on my Facebook pages and such. But in the meantime, there you go. Oh, and this guy, in case you're wondering, you may have been, and I may have said it earlier, but in another episode, but this guy was made for the stage production of Manos, the Hands of Fate that was in Portland a few years ago. And I'll remember to talk more about that later. I need to get some more details so I can give you some names and give credit to the proper people. So, part 2, chapter 5. Although I was 6 going on 7, I could already read quite well from the many trips to the library and from following along when Dad rehearsed scripts for the plays he was in. Whether it was Dad's idea or Hal's, I was given my own monoscript with my few lines highlighted on the page. It served the purpose of boosting my self-esteem and making me feel more a part of the group. While I was in the back seat of the car for the opening scene, my script was taped open and placed on the floor within view for me to refer to. Although I couldn't really see the words at that distance and I wasn't supposed to be looking at the floor, combined with my propensity to become carsick at the least provocation, it made me feel important and led to the thrill of being part of something that my dad was involved in. I recall Hal being kind to me when we needed to interact, but mostly I was just placed where I needed to be, like a prop. Peppy belonged to the Warrens and was quite the wiggly little critter, so my scenes with him were a challenge. I focused most of my attention on holding on to him because he didn't really know me and seemed dubious about being squeezed so tight. I liked him and was glad to have something to do since I was given little direction and really had no idea what I was supposed to do. He could do little tricks for treats, and I enjoyed having him to play with during some of the waiting around times. Peppy was the only character that was definitively killed off in Manos, and fairly early in the film. The night we shot that scene, Hal and Dad pulled me aside to let me know that they weren't actually going to kill the little poodle. A stand-in would take his place, a stuffed toy dog that was similar in size, shape, and color to Peppy. They had torn its belly open to reveal some of the stuffing and soaked it with stage blood. There was nothing frightening about it at all, and I remember even Hal looking at the end result with doubt and consternation. But then he rallied and reminded us for the umpteenth time about the magic of film editing and that it would look great in the finished cut, all creepy and shadowy in the low light. It didn't. In fact, all the trouble they went to was for nothing. The lack of proper lighting in the dark night ensured that very little would be seen on film anyway. Lighting at night was a problem in nearly every scene. Hal used car headlights aimed at the action in the catfight scene. Set photographer Anselm Spring would occasionally point out a potential issue. He'd whisper to Bob something like, "The lights from the nearby highway can be seen in the background." In at least one case, The flawed shot had to stay because of time constraints or Hal's reluctance to reshoot. The master's tomb scenes were lit with everything from headlights, flashlights, the fire in the pyre, and shop lights. The scene of the sheriff and deputy investigating gunshots in the desert had the actors walking only a few paces in front of the car because the desert goes black at that point. The sheriff is holding a theater usher's flashlight, which was all they could come up with in the moment since the actual flashlight had been misplaced after being used as set lighting in a previous scene. The second the two officers of the law begin to walk beyond the scant lighting of the shot, Hal calls, "Stop! Look at each other. Now turn around and go back to the car." At the tomb, I recall Dad standing between the fire and the master's stone resting place for several scenes. Hal thought that having him front lit by the fire would look cool. Instead, he was choked by black, oily smoke each time the wind shifted direction. He'd hold the pose until his breath gave out and then duck out from under it. The general idea was that the shadowy background and low, flickering lights would add an atmosphere of fear and dread to the master parading around in his splendid ministerial robe. That was all well and good, but Dad thought he could take it up a notch while giving himself a bit more to do. So early on, while reviewing the script, he proposed a change to include a sermon of sorts. Something extra to do while holding his arms out ominously, since the script already had him doing quite a bit of that. Tapping into his experience on the pulpit, he wrote the O Manos, God of primal darkness, speech. Holy art thou, holy art thou, holy art thou. I have heard on several occasions that the O Manos monologue had the best lines in the film. Not that that's saying a whole lot, in the whole scheme of things. Diane Murray, my on-screen mom, was only 14 years older than me. She was very sweet, even though we had no chance to develop any rapport, and she was busy concentrating on getting her lines right. We didn't have to look at a script to know the words to row, row, row your boat. But I didn't really get the concept of singing in rounds, so I just kept my mouth shut and watched Diane because I liked that she was singing to me. I doubt we practiced too much before rolling the camera, and I couldn't figure out when to come in anyway. By the time I figured out I was supposed to sing too, we were on to the next scene. Hal made sure to let me know it would be just fine and that I did great. Next. Diane remembers doing what she was told. Once she had been cast and received a script to study for a couple of weeks. She was expected to learn her lines and show up for filming without any actual rehearsal time, get-togethers, or other meetings. She wasn't sure if there was an oversight or a confidence in her ability, or maybe it was just a shortage of time, but that's how it went. At the time she was cast as Maggie, she told Hal that she had no previous acting experience. He responded not to worry. I'll let you know if you do anything wrong. He was true to his word. Today, Diane recalls receiving little constructive criticism or direction of any kind during the filming of Manos. In retrospect, she feels her falling down scenes in the desert were her finest on-screen moments, and they were all hers. Diane does recall that in the scene where she is trapped in the bedroom with Torgo, who is making slow hand advances on her, Hal wanted her to respond by dramatically raking Torgo across the face with her fingernails. Having no previous acting experience and the fact that she didn't know John or anyone very well, she was loath to try such a thing, even if it was fake. Because of her reluctance, Hal changed the scratch to a slap, which Diane struggled with as well. Diane remembers John patiently trying to teach her to throw a stage slap. After several practice attempts, they rolled the camera and she just did the best she could. Diane was actually a bit leery of Hal and his intentions based on her insurance office audition. Although he never made any other advances on her, he did cross the line in another way. He entered her into a beauty pageant without her knowledge or permission. Right about the time he had chosen Diane for the part, Hal had learned that the Miss El Paso beauty pageant was going to be held on May 28th. He decided right then to use his leading lady to best advantage for publicity by entering her as a contestant. He was probably thinking that with any luck, the beautiful and talented Diane Murray Rystad would win this contest and maybe even going on to the next level, becoming Miss Texas. He thought she had a pretty good chance because besides her great looks, she had been a semi-finalist in a Miss Teenage America, runner-up in Miss El Paso Rodeo, a Sun Carnival Duchess, and a folk singer, according to a newspaper article. The only thing was, Hal overlooked talking to Diane about it until she had been accepted as a contestant. She remembers being surprised, but not particularly upset. After all, it could be good publicity, which might lead to better jobs, she thought. Hal flattered the young woman by telling her that participating in the event would be a huge boost to the movie. In his mind, Hal believed he could influence the judges towards his contestant. He would name drop his connections while convincing them of the great publicity if his movie star was also the winner of Miss El Paso. He apparently had some success, as Diane recalls being the only girl who was taken to lunch by some of the judges, and that some of the other girls privately told her they'd heard rumors that she was going to win. She soon found herself on stage as one of the 10 semifinalists. In those days, after the formals, the bathing suits, the talent displays, and everything else, the judges would ask each girl an essential question. The question was different for every girl, and usually simple to answer in a way that would make everyone smile and feel good. Diane's question was, what part do you feel religion should play in your life? Put it all into the context of a 1966 West Texas beauty pageant associated with the Miss America franchise, whose contestants, by definition, must believe in God. And then Diane, a young adult raised as a Christian who had gone forth to seek her own way in the tumultuous times of a self-exploring new culture. Back on stage, Diane paused only for a heartbeat. She knew she was throwing the contest, but being free-spirited, a bit defiant, and basically non-committal to the whole thing, she told her truth. After all, she never asked to be in this contest to begin with. She began by giving her opinions on the hypocrisy of the church and just what she thought of the restrictions and limitations of religion in general. Fortunately, her mother was out of town and unable to attend, but her father, who was in the audience, told Diane later that while she was talking, the audience went dead silent. And when she finished, you could have heard a pin drop for a few seconds, until the audience erupted in the loudest and longest applause of the evening. The contestants who came after her were asked, if you were traveling at 90 miles an hour and a truck was coming at you, what would you do? The girl answered, Texas sweetly, well, first of all, I would never be going 90 miles an hour, but if I were, I would try to avoid the truck at all costs. Afterwards, a couple of the judges told Diane privately that they would have voted for her, but were unable to due to her controversial response. I'm stopping right there for tonight, and I'll see you on the next installment, the next part of Chapter 5. Thank you so much.